Right, okay, comrades and friends, I'm going to ask everyone to settle. I'm going to ask you again if you can just kind of squidge up a bit so that anyone coming in late doesn't disturb us all. Okay, well, a big welcome to Marxism Festival 2023. I'm sure you'll agree, looking at the timetable, there's a host of really exciting debates and discussions over this weekend. My name is Jan Nielsen. I've been a member of the SWP for all of my adult life, a very long time, as you can no doubt tell, and I'll be chairing this meeting. I'm from the Islington branch of the Socialist Workers' Party. If I just quickly explain, I'm going to introduce the speaker in a minute. She will speak for 25 minutes, and then we will open the floor to debate, questions, discussion, and I would really encourage people to come in. Even if it's your first Marxism, it's your first socialist meeting, there's no question or contribution that's too small or too insignificant. This is what it's about. Because what we're discussing today is probably one of the main arguments, but those of us who've been around the left for a long time, it's one of the main arguments we come across when we meet people. They say, it isn't possible, human beings are too selfish, all those kind of things. So please, I encourage you to speak up in the discussion, and then I'll call the speaker back right at the very end. So our speaker today is Sophie Squire. She's a journalist on our weekly paper, Socialist Worker, and so with no further ado, Sophie, I'll introduce you. Start us off.
Thanks, Dan. Before I really begin this meeting, I'm going to make a really bold statement. I'm going to say there's something that maybe all of us can agree on in this room, and that's we are standing in times filled with crisis, misery, collapse, inequality. I know that sounds pretty pessimistic, and I'm sorry we have to kick that off, but I think it's important that we get that out there nice and soon. It may sound pessimistic, but it's undeniable. Every day we watch the news and you see a new tale of horror, and often that tale is one where humans inflict horrific misery on each other, whether it's a mass shooting, war, or a government that won't open its borders to refugees, and so they drown in the Mediterranean. We see evidence of this brutality every day. But is this violence and horror that some members of society inflict on others proof of what human beings are really about? Is this selfishness, this violence, somehow knitted into our DNA, hardwired into our brains from birth? And even if it's not hardwired into our DNA, does the system itself make us irreparably selfish? And surely, if all this is true, then any attempt to build a society based on cooperation and true equality is surely impossible. And so by that logic, surely it's impossible to have a system like socialism, which is of course based on cooperation because of the way that we are. This is, of course, the argument we hear really regularly. We hear it from the right, but actually also sometimes people who say that they are on the left. These kind of ideas go back a very long way. So the 17th century English philosopher Thomas Hobbes is a really good early example of this. So Hobbes characterised nature as a war of every man against every man, in which men must pursue power above else to survive. So that's what Hobbes was saying. So he believed that humans were selfish and greedy to their core, and this greed was the primary motivation behind human behaviour. And because of this, Hobbes believed that humans could be ruled over by an absolute sovereign who could enforce the law, or chaos would ensue because humans are just so corruptible. And you see right-wing governments use this kind of argument that because we are so corruptible, we need more police on the streets. We need more oppressive arms of the state to govern us because we are also just so violent and terrible. This was something that was echoed by Margaret Thatcher when she was saying there's no such thing as society. And then if you want to be successful, you simply have to lift yourself up and just work a little bit harder. Arguments, like this, that we just have to work really, really hard and then everything will be fine and we can be successful, are often pushed by the right, especially when they want to really justify pushing out austerity. They'll say the reason why working class people are poor and suffering is because we're all just too lazy to our core. And, you know, these ideas manifest in others' ideas, you know, maybe that try and take, I'm going to say this in quotation marks, a more kind of scientific route. Like in the thinkings, for example, of Richard Dawkins. You know, in the 90s, he was saying that humans are lumbering robots driven unconsciously by our selfish genes. For Dawkins, the human condition is the result of evolution by natural selection based on the drive of individual humans to ensure their genes are replicated. He wrote that we are survival machines, robot vehicles blindly programmed to preserve the selfish molecules known as genes. But of course, this so-called scientific approach locks the human condition into a state that is unchanging. If we can't escape our genes, how can we change ourselves? And of course, how can we change society with it? Of course, you know, socialists go against these ideas. We don't think that humans are inherently selfish, or our behaviour is locked into our genes, and that we are condemned to be selfish or greedy forever. We know that every day, actually, and I think the one thing that really starts to disprove some of these thinkers and some of these right-wing politicians is that actually, and I think probably everyone will have an example of this right at the forefront of their mind, we see that every day, actually, across the world, ordinary people are doing acts of extraordinary selflessness. And I think actually this is a really good, I know it sounds a bit wet, but this is a really good starting point for trying to say that humans actually aren't inherently greasy, lazy or selfish. You know, for example, why would someone take up a job as a nurse when you are paid so low and your job is so hard? Most people take up these kinds of caring professions because actually at their core they want to help people. A great example, again, of when we help each other in difficult situations is when a natural disaster hits. Usually, actually, it's the community that rushes to help people in these kind of situations. And actually, the state and the police are often the ones trailing behind. I don't know if people have seen, in the last couple of years, there's been, you know, terrible mass shootings in the US. And so many videos have come out of ordinary members of the public taking their life on the line and stopping these mass shootings before more people are killed. And there's a really good example of this from sociologist Eric Klinenberg. So in 1995, there was an awful heat wave in Chicago in the US. And he found that actually the elderly people who lived alone, but on streets with restaurants and shops, you know, busy neighborhoods, actually they survived the heat wave much longer than those who lived in adjacent neighborhoods where streets were empty. So the community protected these vulnerable people. And again, of course, we see this when we look at the networks of mutual support that were set up during the COVID lockdowns. For me, for example, we had a mutual aid kind of group on my street. And also another thing is, why would people give to charity if we're so selfish? And why is it actually that people with very little often give around the same percentage of their earnings as their richer counterparts? Importantly, I think it's really, you know, I took quite a long time listing all the nice things that humans do, but I think it's really important for us to say that humans don't do all these things just because we're really nice. We do this because we are social beings. Instead of thinking our behaviour is a product of our biology or our genes, Marxists take a materialist view. So we see that actually human nature is shaped by our interactions with each other, with nature, and with our economic circumstances. We see that human nature isn't static. It changes and alters when material circumstances change. And that first and foremost, human nature is linked to our relationship to labour, or what we do in order to survive and thrive. As Marx put it, social being determines social consciousness. So to start, let's kind of dial it back a little bit and start thinking about what humans need to do to survive. So we need to eat, we need to drink, we need to have shelter and warmth and the opportunity to raise our children. All of this, of course, is much easier to do when we do it together. And actually, it's not just easier. We need to cooperate as a species to survive. And this is the first thing I will say that is locked into human nature. We have to come together to produce the things we need to live in order to survive, meaning we have a real inherent interest in what happens to each other. You might say, oh, well, you know, it might be possible to live alone. Say you went out in the wilderness, you could maybe survive for a bit, couldn't you? Well, you need a sleeping bag, wouldn't you? Made by someone maybe in China, or a torch assembled by someone, I don't know, in Leicester. And you might say, oh, well, you just live off the land alone. Well, probably not for very long, and your quality of life is actually going to be pretty awful. Really, we need to work together to survive. We need to be around each other for our mental and physical well-being. Every test that's been done of people that have been isolated for a long periods of time have found it is profoundly impacted them both physically and mentally. You know, studies have found that loneliness can make you actually more likely to develop dementia. Yet, despite all of this kind of, scientific evidence, it's important to say that there are still those who will make the argument that we are inherently selfish or greedy, and actually cooperation is not the most important thing for humans to have. So it's really important to say, start by saying that probably for 99% of human history, there was actually no fixed idea about what it means to be human. And certainly different cultures across the globe have had a very different idea of what that means. As socialists, we must put forward our own idea about what it means to be human that goes against any approach that sees humans as selfish or unchanging. First, we have to say that cooperation has been absolutely central to the survival of humans. This was even true from before we actually evolved to who we are now, so from before we evolved to Homo sapiens. Our distant ancestors evolved from apes who climbed down from the trees and began walking upright. To survive in their new environment, they had to cooperate. If they didn't, they would die. Those who didn't cooperate with the group, were actually cast out of the group. And over millions of years, the material reality of that environment where cooperation was necessity led to our distant ancestors changing and evolving. We acquired dexterous hands to hold, shape, and use tools. We developed bigger brains and voices to communicate with each other. All of this to help with cooperation. My dexterous hands aren't working better. We also became conscious of the world and aware that we are humans within it. This is how humans are fundamentally different from animals. Humans shape the world around them with their creative labour. So a good example is a spider make a really beautiful and intricate web, but when a human builds a house, they imagine it before, whilst animals act out of pure instinct. So this emergence of modern humans happened around 200,000 years ago. In time, groups spread out from Africa and across the globe. While these groups were isolated from each other, and of course, there were some differences between these groups, they basically had a shared way of living up until around 10,000 years ago. This way of existing is often called hunter-gatherer societies, but is known often to Marxists as primitive communism. This way of life was based on foraging, so picking plants and fruits, collecting shellfish and hunting animals for food. Humans came together in groups of around maybe about 30 or 40. There were no rulers, bosses, or class where one group of people rule over the other. That's not to say there was no one who led or made decisions. There might be someone in the group who was really, good at identifying edible plants, for example. They might have prominence in the group, but governance was the collective responsibility of everyone. Few archaeological remains have survived from these times. So to understand primitive communism, anthropologists have studied hunter-gatherers of communities that have survived into modern times. And it was the anthropological studies of these egalitarian societies that Marx's collaborator Friedrich Engels drew on, especially in the origin of the family, private property, and the state. He especially drew on the work of American anthropologist Lewis Henry Morgan, who drew extensively on the experiences of the indigenous people of North America. Both Marx and Engels were deeply impressed by Henry Morgan. And I think it's important to say that Marx didn't get, Engels didn't get everything right in his writings, but so much of what he said has been backed up by modern anthropologists. What is really backed up, though, are the levels of cooperation needed to live in these hunter-gatherer societies. After observing the Klusan people of northern Botswana and other peoples in the region, Richard Leakey and Roger Lewin came to the conclusion that the current evidence points to such cooperation between large groups of hunter-gatherers as a key element in the emergence of human characteristics, so how we are. They summarized by saying cooperation must be a very basic motivation of human nature. So with this evidence, we can start to unpick the arguments the right makes that humans are just sort of naturally selfish. Humans lived in hunter-gatherer societies, and in very small pockets do live in these societies. And time again, these societies have proven to be egalitarian, where there is equality between genders and little warfare. And definitely this is not what the mainstream view of like early societies is like. You know, it's characterized often by men pursuing mammoths, misery, and survival of the fittest, you know, this kind of caveman stereotype. Not to say that early humans had an easy life. It was hard, and I'm not saying we should go back. I personally don't want to go back to that. But what I am saying is that the myth we are told that we are living, that how we are living today is in some ways natural, is a completely false one. Humans lived in these hunter-gatherer societies for many thousands of years, much more than actually we've lived in a class society. And capitalism is endured for the tiniest blip in human history. So to make the argument that in some way the human condition is built for capitalist competition, that in some way suits it, is just complete nonsense. But of course now, if you're still sceptical about what human beings are, you might say, oh well, things have changed. Eventually, humans' own greed and selfishness that was sort of locked away deep within us led to the development of a competitive system like capitalism. It was inevitable, it was locked in. But as materialists, we don't see things like that. We see that humans change and society changes because of material factors. The move from a primitive communist society to a class society was a consequence of changing environmental factors. Of course, this didn't happen to every society across the globe at exactly the same time. In some parts of the world, hunter-gathering societies actually existed for much longer. But broadly, climate change made it harder for humans to forage all the food that they needed. And so a new way of life was needed, a life where humans settled and could farm the land. It was this change that happened about 10,000 years ago that led to the development of a class society. So new agricultural and horticultural techniques meant for the first time humans were able to gather a surplus to feed the village if food was scarce. But this surplus, it needed to be protected. This led to the first time leaders being established who protected this surplus. We see for the first time in human history the emergence of the state. For the first time, there was those who did the work and those who had authority over protecting and sharing the surplus. This was also the point at which women's oppression developed. As Engels put it, the world historic defeat of the female sex. Women became locked out of the use of tools used in agriculture and so didn't own them. This meant that men started to be seen as more important because they increasingly made decisions in society. Women's sexuality was controlled by the need to pass power and property down the male line, and monogamy was enforced on women so men knew who their kids were. But I think that's actually a whole meeting in itself. But for the first time, there was a group of people who started to feel they were better than those who laboured. And of course, this class dynamic has changed over time. You know, there's been slave societies to feudal societies to what we have today. But this dynamic of rulers and rules causes all kinds of conflict in our system, from war that sees imperialist powers face off for power, land and resources, to racism and of course sexism that is used to divide us by those that rule society. And class society has created not just the fundamental conflict, which of course is the conflict between the ruling class and the working class, but it's also created conflict inside the working class, from inside the ruling class. And capitalism has taken conflict to new levels because it is a system based on competition and profit, not on human needs. So, you know, individualism and competitiveness are drummed into us into an early age, isn't it? We are graded at school and matched up to our peers. I actually was rated by one maths teacher who put us on a scale of 1 to 30, and actually I was 15. It continues when we compete for jobs, and when we were in the workforce, we were made to compete for the boss's favour and promotions. We are often made to feel as if we have to beat other workers in order to get a big slice of, not actually physically beat, but beat out other workers in order to get a bigger slice of the pie. With this comes alienation, which is the feeling or the sense of a lack of control that flows from the fruits of workers' labour, so what we do, actually not being owned by ourselves. Capitalism leads also to alienation from this disconnect from nature, from ourselves, and importantly from each other. This profound sense of alienation manifests everywhere, from the way that we treat each other badly to the higher levels of mental distress in society. And the bosses are locked into an even bigger game of competition. They are locked into a system that forces them to compete for bigger profits. If they don't compete, they'll be matched by their rivals and go bankrupt. This means that our bosses are always looking for ways to exploit workers more, to invest in new tech, help out corrupt governments, and really do each other over. So selfishness and greed look very different at the top and the bottom of society, but they are driven by the same mechanism, a competitive capitalist system, not our biology or our genes. An argument now would be, well, if we're not inherently selfish, why haven't we toppled capitalism already? Well, I'm going to start by saying that the dominant ideas of the ruling class are the dominant ideas in society. I said before how right-wing politicians, scientists, and thinkers try and make us believe that the way things are now are the natural state of being. Every day the media and even our education system, sorry to teachers in the room, really ratify this for us. But just because this kind of idea is dominant doesn't mean it's the only idea in society. Ideas about cooperation and community are different around the world, and not everyone, even today, do people share the same dominant ideas that exist in the West, especially in the US and Britain. And I'll finish by saying the most important times when I think these ideas about selfishness and greed that humans inherently have get disproven are in times of struggle. Of course, workers cannot win better pay or conditions without cooperation. Strikes only work when workers come together. They must make decisions as one. And when workers strike, they might find some of the old ideas about their college really start to break down. They might start to believe that it's possible to come together, despite the bosses who often use tactics to try and play workers off against each other. Racist, sexist, or transphobic ideas might start to break down because workers see that the real enemy is the boss. Picket lines aren't just important because of their function within the strike, they alter how workers feel about themselves. They transform their confidence, root out old reactionary ideas, and lead to workers setting their sights and demands even above paying conditions. And fundamentally, they take apart the idea that cooperation between us is impossible. I think it's great to stand on a picket line and have workers who've never actually been together in the same space coming together, and they say how amazing it is to be together. And struggles of the past also have shown the extraordinary capabilities of ordinary people to run society, even if for a short time. We can go back to France in 1968, when 10 million workers launched a general strike that at the time was the largest that has ever taken place. Workers started to run society. Water was supplied to Paris under the direction of workers' strike committees. Print workers allowed papers to appear so as to not give state-run TV and a monopoly on media coverage. Rank and file action committee, so workers from the ground up, organised practical tasks such as cleaning rubbish or collecting money and food for strikers' families. Other examples, of course, we could go on, include the Russian Revolution of 1917 and Portugal's 1974 to 75 revolution, where workers started running factories for themselves. When workers organise for themselves, it goes against everything the ruling class tell us, that we are stupid, lazy, and we should stay out of political life. Of course, this is dangerous for the bosses, as they don't want us to think that organising a collective society is possible. And it's also important to say that extraordinary levels, just to finish, of cooperation between humans actually do already go on under capitalism. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx actually wrote quite a lot about the extraordinary achievements that capitalism has brought, and he actually spends quite a lot of time on it. He admits that capitalism has led to a world where there is a potential for there to be plenty. And today we do live in a world of plenty, but it's not plenty for all, only for a few. We live in a world where planes fly in the sky and you can order anything online from anywhere in the world, and you can get it within a day. All of this takes a massive amount of cooperation and planning between people. But this potential isn't used to cure world hunger or poverty or create a greener world, it's used to make profit. This massive organisational potential is right there, it's just not planned across society to meet our needs. So as socialists, we have a lot of hope about what human beings can achieve. We believe it is possible to live in a society based on meeting needs, not amassing wealth for a privileged few. We don't believe that we are inherently selfish or greedy. We think we have the ability to organise a better world together. If you believe this, you can start to believe that socialism is within our reach, and I'll finish there. Thanks, Jan. Thanks for a really rich and interesting.
I'd move over here.
Sorry, I'll go to the middle.
Yeah.
Discussion. I think there's a lot of things to come back on. I think we have to be a little bit careful when we talk about intelligence. I think that actually broadly a lot of tests have been done that most people are kind of on a reasonably similar level. But the thing that actually matters is education and the kind of environment that people grow up in. You know, to achieve, you know, high levels of education, you need usually high levels of money, and also time and space to be able to do those things. So I think we have to be careful when we talk about that. And I think we also have to say that actually human beings' ability to innovate and to, you know, be creative, to invent new things is curtailed by capitalism. You know, there's so much potential that exists in the world today that is completely untapped talent by people who will never be able to go to university or go to have progressed education. So I think that we have to be very careful when we talk about intelligence, and I think that people aren't, you know, too dumb to kind of have socialism. There's other factors, of course, like as the consciousness that I was talking about in my meeting, and also how strong the state is in kind of crushing kind of more progressive ideas. So I think we have to be a little bit careful about that. So another question I think that was really interesting was about should we change the title of this meeting to is the male human condition a barrier to socialism? And I think we have to, again, this is something we have to be very, very careful about. And I think the comrade in the front was talking a lot about what it means to be a man. And I think, again, to socialists, there is no inherent thing inside men that makes them, the stereotypes types of society, for example, violent or brutish, or I don't think there's anything inherent within men that make them that make them that way. I don't think it's plugged into their genes. I don't think it's tuned into their brains. Sexism is a product of a capitalist society. As I talked a little bit about the historic defeat of the female sex, these ideas about sexism grew out of a class society, and then it have really been ratified in a capitalist society. There is going to be a meeting that probably will go really more into that. It's at 4 o'clock. It's called Biology, the Root of Women's Oppression, and I think that meeting will go much further into it, but I think I would definitely refute that we should say that men are inherently locked into a kind of set of behaviours by their biology or their genes. I think we have to go really strongly against that, because I mean, men are half of the world, and if we say that half of the world can't be part of a movement against socialism, I don't think we're gonna get too far. Well, I'd love to say that women can do it on their own, but I don't think that's true. So I think that there was a few other things that I think was important. Yeah, I talked a little bit about the selfish gene at the start of my meeting, and Richard Dawkins, about how we aren't trapped by our genes. And I think that's a really important thing to say, that human behaviour, socialists, we don't think that human behaviour dictates the way that we act in the world. It can predict other things, but I don't think human behaviour is set in stone by our genes. Yeah, I'm just trying to think about what else we talked about. So I think that we need to end this on, and I think what people have talked about a lot in the discussion is about how ideas can change. And I think that I'll keep going back to picket lines and how important they are for changing the way that we feel about ourselves, the way that we feel about other people. And I think this is truly the moment where you can start to refute that we are inherently selfish. There is no way we can win a strike. There is no way we can win better conditions without working together. And I think, there are strikers in this room. Darren is a striker from Amazon. There are strikers from the universities as well. And I think every single person will share this feeling of changing your ideas when you step out on a picket line. You have to start organising things that, the bosses have said you can never organise, even if it's small things like, organising the tea or organising where we can picket. All of the things that we do on the picket lines really refute these ideas that we're told by the bosses, that we can't organise anything, that we can't create a more cooperative society. So I think that we have to keep on every single time, and actually every one of our meetings that we have at Marxism, keep on going back to the picket lines and how these ideas can be changed during struggle. And I think I'm just going to try and, yeah. Yeah, and I think that your question was really, really interesting about, you know, if there was a selfish, for example, a selfish person in a group, or when we're talking about maybe a move to a different kind of society, a socialist society, there was one selfish person. I think that really comes down to what we, you know, to governance, isn't it? It's, again, in a capitalist society, we are told we cannot run things. We cannot make decisions about justice. We cannot make decisions about if someone does something that is bad, what happens to them. We don't get that decision in society. You know, the prison system, the judiciary is all set up, and it all sort of happens away from us. And I think that we are locked out of those things. So when I think in a society, if someone acts in a selfish way, I think it'll be down to the collective to decide what actually happens to them. I mean, I think that someone pointed this out. I don't think selfishness is going to disappear overnight. You know, when we achieve that golden day, when we achieve socialism, I don't think it's going to go. I think these ideas that have come from capitalism are incredibly deeply rooted. But I think that, actually also it's proven that in struggle, actually ideas can change pretty quickly. You know, for example, in the Russian Revolution, ideas about women and about actually, not that they changed completely overnight, but they actually began to break down because they didn't make the same kind of sense anymore. So I think that we have to keep coming back every single time to struggle and to how. And really to how that the working class, as Marx considered it, is the universal class. It's the class that is their interests, our interests, are in the interests of human of the rest of humanity. And we can take it back to the climate crisis as well. When you think about the absolute illogical way that the bosses run the system, where they continue to plummet the ground for fossil fuels, they continue to dig for oil, they continue to live in a completely unsustainable way. If you walk through the street and you talk to someone and go, oh, do you think we should, you know, stop fossil fuels because we're killing the planet? Most ordinary people will say it's illogical that we keep on doing that, and we need to stop burning fossil fuels. So I think we need to take the logic of the working class, the logic of ordinary people, and apply it to the rest of society. And that logic, I think, most of the time is not motivated by selfishness or greed. It's motivated by, you know, wanting to survive, wanting to live in a better world. Yeah, and again, I think, just to finish, what we actually do in the here and now to create that kind of society is really, really important. If we don't believe that we are selfish or greedy, we have to believe that we have to, you know, a better society, but we need to get, sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but we need to do things to change it. There's no point in just sitting around and talking about this stuff. We actually need to be there on the front lines doing it. We need to be, as socialists, coming into having this argument about human nature on picket lines everywhere that we go. We need to have this argument, and I think that's the answer. And I think being organised and knowing these things is what we need to we can get from this meeting, or what we can get from the rest of Marxism. So I'm going to finish there before I ramble on too long. So thank you very much.